Are you afraid of the dark? If not, you probably were as a child. Go ahead, admit it. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It's a common fear. The terror of night is deeply rooted in the human psyche. It's a primal fear, an instinct necessary for survival. Even when there is no immediate danger, even when we know we are perfectly safe, we still jump at every little noise and hide under the covers, so that whatever lurks in the shadows can't see us. Yes, many of us are afraid of the dark. You may very well be one of them, but have you ever considered that this fear might be meaningless? I'll let you in on a little secret. It isn't the dark you should fear, but rather the light of day. You may scoff at this, thinking that it makes no sense, but please bear with me for a moment, and let me explain why our fear of the dark is pointless and why our belief in the safety of light is dangerously naive. Now, before we begin, I should mention that this isn't really my story per se. The events I'm about to recount have happened to a good friend of mine, and while I was there to witness much of it, I didn't experience it the way David did. But David is no longer around to tell his story, and among his family and friends, I'm the one who seems willing to talk about what happened. So this is what happened to David, through the eyes of someone who knew him well and loved him deeply, and wants people to know how he died so that maybe others can avoid the same fate. Okay, enough rambling. Let's begin. David and I became close friends since we were in kindergarten, and David, like many children his age, were afraid of the dark. He slept with a nightlight and believed that there were ghosts hiding in his closet and a monster under his bed. He claimed he could hear things whispering in the dark, and while he never saw anything, he could sense their presence. Nobody took this very seriously, since David was known to have an overactive imagination, but they were certain he would eventually grow out of it. And he did. Somewhat. He stopped talking about ghosts and monsters and ditched the nightlight in 4th grade, but he still became noticeably jittery whenever the sun went down, jumping at the tiniest noises, and his eyes would dart around frantically around the room as he searched for something only he could see. The trouble began in the fall of 2015, during our 2nd year of college. David had moved out of his parents' house over the summer, settling in a cramped apartment with his girlfriend Savannah, whom he had met the year before when they were paired as lab partners in his chemistry class. The two were quite content with their new living conditions until one October morning, when Savannah called me out of nowhere and told me that something was wrong with David. "What do you mean?" I asked. Savannah explained that David had been acting really paranoid lately. When he was alone in his apartment, he would close all the blinds and turn off the lights. Given his lifelong fear of the dark, this was more than a little bizarre. "You're his best friend, Amber," Savannah pleaded. "You probably know him better than me. What should I do?" I bit my lip, confused and not knowing what to make of the situation. "Have you tried talking to him about it?" "Of course, but he just denies there being anything wrong. At first, I thought he was just stressed from school and work, plus moving into a new place, but I think it might be more serious than that." "That is strange," I admitted, "but I'm sure there's a logical explanation." "I don't know, Amber. Why won't he tell me what's wrong? He knows I love him." "He probably doesn't want to burden you," I soothed. "Let me talk to him. Maybe I can help." "Thank you, Amber." There was a muffled curse, then, "I'm late for class and I'll talk to you later." She hung up. I was also late for class, so I left my own apartment, which I shared with 3 other girls, and burned rubber on the 5-minute drive to college. I only had morning classes that day, so I texted David and asked him if he wanted to meet me for lunch at our favorite place. He agreed. When I saw him, I was shocked. It had only been 4 days since I'd last seen him in person, but the change was shocking. He looked sickly pale, and his normally bright green eyes were muted, dull, and framed in thick dark rings. His hair was disheveled, and His whole body vibrated as if he had an electric current running beneath his skin. "Hi, Amber," he stammered, forcing a painful grin. "How are you doing?" "David, you look awful." "Call me what you want, but I've never been the type to mince words." "Yeah, I know. I haven't been sleeping very well. I think I've developed insomnia from staying up all night studying. I'm going to visit the doctors this week and see if I can get some sleeping pills." We got seated and ordered our food, and I told him what Savannah had said. "She's worried about you, David. She worries too much," he said, flicking his hand dismissively. "Don't get me wrong, I love that girl more than I love myself, but it would do her some good just to loosen up a little." "David, if something is wrong, you can tell me. You know I'm always here for you." "Amber." "David." I countered, my voice stern. I was only a couple months older than him, but David looked up to me, and when I got stern with him, he shaped up immediately. "Don't lie to me. If you don't speak now, I'll have to resort to more underhanded methods." He winced and then sighed, scrubbing at his face with his hands. "Promise you won't laugh or call me crazy." "Well, I guess it depends on what you tell me. I might not be able to help it." "Can you at least try?" I smiled. "Of course." He sighed again and then looked me dead in the eye and said, "Something is haunting me." Normally I would have scoffed at this, but he looked genuinely afraid, and that worried me. "What? Something's haunting you?" "Yeah." He took a sip of his water and stared into the glass. "It only comes during the day and when there's a lot of light. This thing, whatever it is, well, I guess it can't see in the dark because it can't find me so easily. So I'm safest at night, I mean. It still hangs around, but it can't get me." I won't lie, I felt like I had bugs crawling under my skin. "Is it with you now?" He glanced over his shoulder, nervous and shaking. "I don't see it, but I know it's here." The waitress brought our food, but I wasn't sure I could eat. "David, are you on drugs?" I knew he had experimented with pot during high school, so it wasn't out of the realm of possibility. David shook his head frantically. No, this is real, Amber. Something is after me." He let out a mad cackle. "Isn't that weird? I used to be terrified of the dark, but now the dark is my haven. Isn't that crazy?" "David, you need help. This isn't normal." "I'm not insane, Amber," he insisted, but he had a deranged look in his eyes that made me seriously question this statement. Afraid for my friend's mental state, I set him up for an appointment with one of the campus counselors. David also went to his doctor as planned and was prescribed sleeping pills and anti-anxiety medication. For a while, things were looking up. David's color returned and he seemed more relaxed. But everything went to hell again in January. We went to a local club to celebrate the new year. I had a lot to drink that night, and yes, I'm a heavy drinker, I get it, but my memory might not be 100%. But I have a good grasp on what happened. We were at a club with a bunch of our friends, and the place was having a disco-themed night. There was a spinning ball overhead, flashing bright, multicolored lights across the dance floor. We were having a blast when David, out of nowhere, began screaming like a maniac. To this day, I can't get those terrible sounds out of my head. They were loud enough to compete with the music, and everyone stopped to stare. The bouncers assumed David was high or dangerously insane and threw him out of the club, and the rest of us followed him. We found David in a back alley, screaming bloody murder and banging his head against the brick wall. "It's back! It's back!" he screamed. "It's coming for me! It's coming for me!" We managed to calm down David enough to get him in the car and rush him to the hospital. He needed stitches in his forehead and was admitted to the psych ward, where he would stay for weeks. He was diagnosed as schizophrenic and put on a stronger dose of medication. During therapy sessions, he would ramble on about an evil entity with glowing red eyes and a twisted face that watched him from the corners of the room and was empowered by the light. He spoke about the beings that had haunted him through his childhood and which he now believed had been protecting him from his current tormentor. He drew pictures of what he saw, but Since he requested they be destroyed, I never got to see him. Savannah did, however, but she couldn't give me any details beyond. If there's really a hell, those are the kind of creatures that live there. Eventually, the doctors were able to get David under control, and they sent him home with a prescription of antipsychotic drugs and a recommendation to see a psychiatrist regularly. We all thought the terror was over, but it wasn't. It wasn't. David's behavior became increasingly more erratic. He insisted on keeping the lights off at all times and would flip out if they were turned on. He even went so far as to cover all the windows of him and Savannah's apartment in newspapers. Savannah couldn't take it anymore and eventually moved out. David's grades began to slip and I saw him less and less. He stopped answering my calls and texts and I began to fear the worst. Things finally came to a head that March. David stopped showing up to classes and work, and then the police were called to check on him. When the cops sent over entered his apartment, he found the place in a mess. The windows were covered and the bulbs were removed from all the light fixtures. The officer found David huddled in his bedroom closet, muttering about something coming to kill him. When the cops shone the flashlight on him, David began screaming and attacked the poor man, breaking his nose. Backup was called and David was taken back to the psych ward. An inspection of the apartment revealed that he had been subsiding on instant coffee and his pills. He only weighed 90 pounds. You read that right. A 5'10" man only weighing 90 pounds. I'm surprised he was still alive when they found him. After being admitted to the hospital for a second time, David lapsed into a catatonic state, occasionally muttering about something coming for him and that his end was near. He was placed on a suicide watch while the doctors tried to figure out how to treat him. On March 25th, 2016, David was found dead in his room. There were holes in the walls and the mattress had been shredded. Blood was splattered everywhere and David himself was covered in defensive wounds. He'd obviously put up one hell of a fight. But nobody reported hearing anything and the autopsy report was inconclusive. To this day, his death is still an open case, a burning question with no answer. David's death shattered me. Not only had I lost my best friend, but knowing how he died so frightened and alone still haunts me. I believe what he saw was real and that he was killed by a sinister entity drawn to him by the light. Maybe I'm crazy, but I saw David deteriorate. I saw the terror in his eyes. I know the truth is out there, but I just don't know where to look, and that's what really gets to me. I want people to know what happened to David, to understand that there are truly some unexplainable things out there. I don't want him to be remembered as the poor insane man when he was killed by something he couldn't fight off. Now I sleep with my blinds drawn and doors shut, blocking out any traces of light. I often go for long walks at night, and I feel safest when the moon is out. After all, it isn't the dark you should fear. It's the harsh light of day that brings out the real monsters.